Ever since the Mr. Crunch came out, which is the first tool of the Leatherman garage, there has been a lot of discussion and debate of whether it's ethical and so on. Today, though, I want to answer one question that permeates through that entire discussion. Is it worth it for Leatherman to make this design? And is everyone else missing out on something that is truly awesome and useful? Let me go ahead and answer that in the short form. No. Let me say it again. Hell no. And I want to show you in this video exactly why that is the case. Let's get to it. Before we get started on plier heads and the evolution of pliers in Leatherman, let me first say what the Mr. Crunch is. There's been a lot of speculation, but based on what we know, the Mr. Crunch multi-tool is a tribute to the man who brought Leatherman to life. His original design, the Mr. Crunch, never got a chance to go to production. And the reason it didn't is complicated, and we'll get into that. But this is probably, I think, one of the most amazing tributes they could have made to the man, the myth, the legend that is Tim Leatherman. They actually were able to accomplish his design using modern technology. Now, whether it is worth it, whether it is going to be effective as a tool is part of what we're going to answer in this video. But how awesome is it that it exists, something that is a tribute to the original Mr. Crunch design? So to Leatherman, I say, well done. What a nice way to kind of start the Leatherman garage, the same way Tim Leatherman started in the first place. The oldest iteration I have on the table is the original Leatherman Wave. Now this plier is similar to the upgraded version of the PST plier. Very, very similar to that exact one. Now this one really held up, but it stayed incredibly narrow so that you could still get into small places. Over time, Leatherman decided to beef up that plier head. Now, I'm sure there's more than one reason here, but once you started introducing the replaceable cutters, you needed to increase the amount of metal so that you could maintain the strength. So what we saw, like in the case of the Surge, is a lot more steel around that area because the cutout weakens the plier inevitably. Consumers have misused multi-tools quite often. I don't mean to pick on people, but these are not dedicated pliers, okay? And if you think you're going to get the same use out of it, you are sorely mistaken. I cannot tell you how many broken juice pliers I have seen people post about, and then they say, well, it couldn't even take, twisting and all that. I'm like, no, of course it won't, because it's a cast plier, and look at how thin it is. This is like basically a 1/4 inch. These are very, very, very fine, and they're designed for grabbing things and using it in the plane of strength. And what they did most recently is introduce the P4 plier head. Now, this plier head, as they said in their marketing strategy, was the strongest plier they ever made, right? Now notice, it's basically a triangle. It makes sense why this would be the strongest or close to the strongest. There is a lot of metal built around this plier. What the problem is with this is that it makes it much worse as a needle nose. You're not going to get into the small spaces as well, but it is going to compensate for people trying to use it in ways that really it shouldn't be. Now, I'm saying that because I want to talk about the Leatherman Mr. Crunch, okay? In that context, they have over time tried to beef up the pliers to make it so that people break them less often. That just makes sense. It costs them less money. It gives them a better, people feel better about their Leathermans when they don't break. I mean, that makes sense, right? The problem with the Mr. Crunch is that this is an accident waiting to happen. When I say an accident, I don't mean people getting hurt. What I mean is that it's very likely to break. And so I want to go into that a little bit, starting with the fact that they're using the P4 platform. Inside the plier head of these, right near the pivot, is actually a rubber gasket. You could see it sticking out right there. Now that rubber gasket, let me close this up. The rubber gasket is what allows the plier to shift relative to the pivot and then lock into the frame. It's a clever design, but makes another set of problems because of its existence. And one of those problems is that there is more play in this plier head when being used in different applications of force. A lot of people I've talked to about the P4 who have tried to use it heavily have felt that it wasn't very secure in the pivot, in part because of the amount of play that is capable. That builds into the problems that you are going to have when you utilize this removable needle nose section. And speaking of removable needle nose section, how useful would you expect this to be with just how thick that tip is and how wide it is? I mean, it's literally wider than this. It's not as fine as even the surge, and certainly not in this direction either. I'm not sure in what way this is going to help. And if you look at the original design of the Mr. Crunch, in many ways it was superior. Maybe didn't look as good, but functionally speaking, because it was a series of plates that it gripped with, there was a lot less metal at the very tip, which allowed it to grip onto small things and be used as a needle nose. That design, though, was not being fully embodied with this. This is a representation of it. Think of it like a prototype model. The original design was likely made from forged plates when we're talking about the outer arms. That was the kind of technology that they had at the time, and that would have taken a lot of painstaking work to shape it exactly as it should be, then heat treated and so on. What this means is it would be very, very, very strong, but prohibitively expensive to make and distribute, which is why obviously they're going to use cast parts in the Mr. Crunch, which is what we have. We have cast external tips on this Mr. Crunch. And this is where I have a problem. Not only is there a lot of play in the design up here, you can see just how much it shifts, and you can see on the inside how much space is needed for this to slot in properly. But if you look at the inner pliers, they didn't directly copy what Tim did with his original design. Notice that these come to a very narrow point at the very end instead of having a longer flat section, which many blunt nose pliers actually have. Now, in the original design, they had built-in wire cutters, which were a lot shorter, which would mean that you could have more space for that flat edge. Now, that's in part is to protect the tip of the pliers. This edge is going to be destroyed quite quickly on any hardened steel nut. And that is one of the problems, because this is what's going into the plier that is... Okay, let's see if I can get this out. That's what's going in here. So any damage to that tip is going to affect how this mechanism works in its entirety. On top of that, because this is cast, the strength is pretty equal all the way around it. And they have a hole cut out to accommodate that tip closing completely. And that tip is actually pressing up inside against this wall of steel. Now, it's actually reasonably thick, but I would imagine over time, this joint, this area right here, where there's one flat area hitting another one, is going to become a weak point. And the more pressure you put on it, the more likely it is to crack. Now, when I demonstrated this before, everyone was like, wow, are those closing diagonally? And they kind of do, and that is really cool. And honestly, had I not experienced this, I wouldn't have seen that, and that is a very cool feature. However, they don't open particularly far for the applications like something like a plier wrench would, and I have concerns about doing this at the tip with anything serious. Even if they could afford to make this design with cast ends like this, I don't think it makes any sense. They're going to have so many warranty claims. I can't imagine it being worth it to them. There's already been designs like that, such as the Skeletal, which they have a lot of warranty claims because people abuse the pliers. I'm not sure that it would be worth it for Leatherman to introduce a design that doesn't necessarily offer an advantage over having, say, this plus a plier wrench or so on. And yeah, it's a headache to make on top of everything else. Are you missing out? No. I just wanted to make it clear that this is very much an incredible homage to Tim Leatherman and his genius. And he has offered so many incredible designs through his history at Leatherman. And yeah, I'm really thankful to be able to have it in my possession for a period of time so that I could look at it. Now, I'm not going to keep it forever. At the end of this year, we're going to be doing something with this once I can compare all the tools that came out this year. But this is not a usable tool, in my opinion. I think that this is, in many ways, a weaker plier head than most of the plier heads that have been made. It's certainly going to be weaker than the P4. It's absolutely going to be weaker than the Surge. And I have my doubts that it would even compare to the more standard rebar plier head. And I don't know if it has any advantage that I'm willing to justify in my carry. I prefer having that fine tip, and this just doesn't do it. And it moves. It has too much play. And that's kind of goes with the territory because of the way this is designed. Without that play, you can't get the pliers to slide cleanly into the tip. So, I know many people are sad because they weren't able to get in on this drop. They were sold out in half an hour. What I say to you is, unless you are a collector, don't sweat it, because there really is no practical advantage to this design. People will argue with me, and people would disagree, but I'm not willing to put it through the paces to prove it. Maybe I'm wrong, and I will, it's possible. But based on the materials alone, which is a cast tip with a thin metal wall, I am not confident that this is strong enough to be used the way I would use many other tools. And in fact, I don't even think I would trust it as much as I would a real multi-tool plier like the Surge. So yeah, just got to say that. I want to get that out there. A lot of people are doing reviews of it. I think that's great. But as far as being a practical tool that they create and sell, heck no. Please do not do that. And if they do, please don't buy it. I hate to say that. It's an incredible piece of engineering, but with its cast tips, it's an impractical tool that is likely to break very, very quickly. So that's it. That's my thoughts on it. And this is certainly an opinion, but I'm trying to, as best I can, to show my reasons for this opinion. I hope this was useful, and maybe you feel a little bit better about not having a Mr. Crunch. Anyway, you guys have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.